I'm going to go ahead and hit the recording button here, as I usually do. And our live students, if you'll just bear with me for a minute, let me welcome those that are watching this recording. Those that are pushed a few buttons to watch this recording, thank you. You've reached us here doing session 3, talking about Joseph, and the title is From Slave to Deputy Pharaoh. And we're still in the series called The Story. I'm Paul McLeod, the Minister of Education here at Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, to everyone, last week, we saw how God's plan for his people is seen in the story of Abraham. And we saw the beginning of the Israelite nation. We saw how God sovereignly called a person named Abram, who was not even a God-fearer, wasn't even worshiping God, but what we would call a heathen, who we would call a heathen, called him and had his whole family move and called him to worship God. And he made a promise that through Abraham and his descendants, the whole world, all nations would be blessed. And here we see the beginning of the Israelite nation. And I mentioned last week also, we're starting to see a pattern here. And I mentioned that God's plan to get us back, and that's the overall plan, is not going to come from ourselves. It's not going to come from humans. And we saw that with Noah in the flood, what happened. But we have to acknowledge that God somehow involves people who see themselves as unqualified in the lower story. These people that God uses, like Noah and Abram, and we'll see today a person named Joseph, that God uses people that see themselves as unqualified. God will use them to move his plan forward. So this week, we're going to see how God can work through difficult circumstances to bring about good. We'll see that in the story of Joseph. And also we'll continue to commit movement 1 to memory. I mentioned last week, there's a couple tips in memorizing. Number 1 is repetition. Just seeing it over and over and over, it just gets in you, and all of a sudden you can say it for memory. And the second tip is to use keywords. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint. You'll see it on, if you'll take a look at your screen, I'll go ahead and share my screen. And as you take a look at the story, and you look at really the story of the whole Bible, of course, you'll see it divided up into 5 movements. You've got the story of the garden, which is Genesis 1 through 11. You see the story of Israel, which we see the start of really today. And that's reflected in the Bible in Genesis 12 through the book of Malachi, basically the rest of the Old Testament. We get into the New Testament with the story of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Bible. And we call that collection of books the Gospels. Technically, there's really only one gospel, but a lot of times when we talk about more than one book and that collection of books, those 4, we say Gospels. And then after the Gospels, we have the book of Acts, and that starts the story of the church all the way from Acts to Jude, just before Revelation. Those books tell the story of the church. And then lastly, the last book, the book of the Revelation, tells the story of the new garden. Notice it's one revelation. It's not revelations. There's only one revelation, so it's the book of Revelation. So we have 5 movements in the story. And to help us memorize this, I suggest that we use keywords. Don't try to memorize each bullet. Just try to remember garden, Israel, Jesus, church, new garden. If you can say that several times a day, then all of a sudden it kind of makes sense to you, and you can say it. I've run up. It's kind of funny. I've bumped into some people in some stores that are here on Bible in Bible study, and I've had a couple of people say, "Okay, what are the 5 movements of the story?" And the first time that happened, I have to admit, I got caught flat-footed, and I hesitated, and then I remember the key words, and I said, okay, here it is. It's garden, Israel, Jesus, church, and new garden. And so I was excited to say that because I started memorizing it. But say that several times a day, maybe put it on a 3x5 card, index card, and put it up somewhere. But let's say that 3 times ourselves. And so say them with me, and this will help you because you're using more than one sense. You're hearing it, and you're saying it, and you're seeing it on the screen, involving senses. And so let's say it 3 times together to help us in this memory. So here we go. Garden, Israel, Jesus, church, new garden. All right. You'll notice a lag. You'll notice that some people, it sounds like they're saying it after you maybe. Just try to ignore that. It's because of the technology, and there is a delay, but we'll kind of get used to that. Okay, let's say it again for the second time. Here we go. Garden, Israel, Jesus, church, new garden. There we go. One more time. Here we go. Garden, Israel, church, new garden. Very good. I hear some voices out there. That's wonderful. That is so good. Now the next slide that you see here is, if I can bring it up, is the story movement number 1. Now, the whole goal is not really to learn this word for word, is to be able to tell someone the story in your own words. And you probably, just by going over it and over it, use most of the words, but don't sweat it if you're not memorizing every little word. You want to just get the major things, the basic flow of it. And so let's say all this movement number 1, we're going to say it twice together. And so here we go. In the upper story, God creates the lower story. His vision is to come down and be with us in a beautiful garden. The first 2 people reject God's vision and are escorted from paradise. Their decision introduces sin human race from community with God. At this moment, God gives a promise and plan to get us back. The rest of the Bible, God's story of how he kept that promise and made it possible for us to enter a loving relationship with him. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. You'll notice that more words this week are highlighted or in blue and underlined. That is to reflect how it looks in your study guide. If you notice, from week to week, the author or whoever edited the study guide is putting in more and more blanks, so that when you hit it, when you look at it and you're reading through it, you're hitting more blanks, but you're remembering the words in those blanks, and that's helping your memory. So each week as we go along, you're going to see more and more blanks. But the good thing is you're learning it better, and you're able to fill in the blanks without looking. And if you have to look at a word or two, and I think they have a key at the end of each chapter or section, then that's fine. But it just helps you along. So let's say the story movement 1 all together one more time. Here we go. In the upper story, God creates the lower story. His vision comes down with us in a beautiful garden. The first 2 people reject God's vision and are escorted from paradise. Their decision introduces sin into the human race and keeps us from community with God.
with God.
At
At
this
At
moment,
this moment,
God gives a
God
promise
gives a
and
promise,
launches a plan
launches a
to get
plan
us back.
to get us back.
The rest of the
The
Bible
rest
is
of the Bible,
God's story
God's
of
story
how He kept
of how
that
He kept that
promise
promise
and made
and
it
made it
possible for us
possible
to
for
enter
us to
a
enter
loving
a loving
relationship with
relationship
Him.
with Him.
Wonderful. Give yourself a hand. You can physically, I guess, or do a reaction or something like that. So wonderful. Thank you for participating in that. It was good to hear the voices, and I'm hoping that those were on mute were able to follow along. I'll go ahead and give you a hand clap reaction. You can see that on my screen. So that's great. And we'll continue to do this week in and week out. I encourage you, if you have your reading partner, that might be something that you all go over as you touch base at least once, maybe twice a week. You go over that yourself, but maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Just say it to yourself. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself, but you're learning it by repetition, and you probably don't even realize that you're learning it. And that's the neat thing about it. All right, a little icebreaker here. Let's take a look and see what we got this week. If you look at your screens, and if you've left the room, come on back and look at your screen. The question is, when is the first math homework problem mentioned in the Bible? Now, those that have seen this before have seen it in the weekly announcements email, and it'll be very easy. And you can just hit it, hit submit, and you're finished. If you are not receiving the weekly announcements email, you're going to have to kind of figure it out. And if you do want to receive the email, the weekly announcements email, just let me know. After we're finished here and we hang out, you can just hang out for a second, give me your email address, or you can call me, or you can text me, or you can email me, however you want to contact me if you'd like to get the email. But go ahead and take a look at those answers. There's only one correct answer. It's not a trick question. Try to be a little creative, but those that get the email should recognize this as one of my good, clean, hopefully clean puns. So I'll give you a second. We're doing pretty good on participation. And depending on what a device you're on, you may have to scroll up and down to see all the answers. And you may have to scroll up or down to hit the submit button. So we want to get a lot of participation. So go ahead and take a look at that. I hear a couple giggles. All right, let's see how we're doing. We got 26 out of 34, 76%. Okay, let's see if we can get a little higher.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yes, it is.
All right, I'm going to give you about maybe 15, 20 more seconds. We've got 85%, 88% participation. Wonderful. We can get about 3 or 4 more. 3 or 4 holding out on us. Go ahead and push those buttons, whatever you got to do. Give you about 10 more seconds. All right. We got 31 out of 35%, 88% participation. Not bad, not bad. Doesn't get a arms up from me, but not too bad. If you take a look at your screen, you can see the results. Far and away, the answer that most people like to think that they're correct is the first math homework problem mentioned in the Bible 61% of us, 19 out of 31 people said it was when God told the fish and the birds to multiply. That is the correct answer to the pun. That is correct. He told when he was in creation, he told the fish and the birds to go forth and multiply. And isn't it interesting that they just obeyed? We don't have an account in the Bible of any arguments about it. We don't see where there was a rebellion or any complaints. They just went forth and multiplied. He gave a similar directive to human beings also later on. And we seem to do that okay, I guess. There are a few people who kind of rebel, but for the most part, we human beings are going forth and multiplying. The second place was when God told Abram to add to himself a great nation. That is not correct. Why is that not correct? Somebody tell me why that's not correct.
Abraham couldn't do it on his own strength. God had a major role in blessing Abraham to build a great nation.
Right.
He told him that he would give him a nation, children as many as the stars in the sky that he could count, and he knew that he couldn't count that much, and he mentioned that.
Right.
So he failed at the math question.
He said, count the stars in the sky, Abram. Yeah, that's how many you're going to have. Yeah, you're both right. It was God who was doing it, not himself. He didn't tell Abram to go forth and add to himself. He couldn't do that in his own power. Abram's wife, Sarah, tried to help out a little, of course, but no, that's not correct. Let's see. The second answer possibility was when God told the Israelites not to add to his commandments, but they were to his commandments, but they could subtract from them. That is not correct. In Deuteronomy, he said when he was in an expanded form of the law, and he was giving them a lot of statutes. He said he gave them a warning. He stopped for a second. He put it on pause for a minute. And in Deuteronomy, he said that you're not to add or subtract. Some versions say subtract. Some versions, most versions say take away from his laws, from his word. So they're not supposed to do that. All right, let's see. There was another choice when God told the people of Israel to divide the Red Sea. Oh, so we've got add, we've got subtract, we've got multiply, now we've got divide. What's wrong with that one? That one should be, that should be right, shouldn't it?
No, wrong.
Why is that?
Because they couldn't divide the Red Sea.
Oh, but the Red Sea divided, didn't it?
That's God did.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it wasn't the first match.
It wasn't the first math. No, it wasn't.
And the Red Sea was not divided, it parted. To divide means to measure out.
Ah, okay. Ooh, we've got a wordsmith in our midst. The key thing is that the main character of the Bible, who is God, is the one that split or divide or
Parted.
what was that word you used, Denise? Or
Parted.
He parted, he did not measure out.
okay, parted the Red Sea. It was God who did that. It was not the Israelites that did that. They did not have the power. So we can see, even from this question, that the main character, and we learn this more and more as we go through the Bible, the main character is not humans. We're not the main character of the Bible. Neither is his opponent, the devil, or Satan, Beelzebub. He has many names. That's his adversary. He's not the main character. The Israelites are not the main character. The angels are not the main character, but the main character of the Bible is God. And so we see him doing the work. All right. Overall, as a group, we did pretty well. We did pretty good. So give yourself a hand. Well, as a reaction, or you can clap to yourself or something like that. Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started with our video. You can take notes in your study guide on page 36. Let me double check that. Should be on page 36. Yes. At the bottom of the page, there's 5 bullets. And you can see those where he has a statement, and you can fill in the blank. So on page 36, you can go ahead and take a look at that as I set up my screen here. All right, as I like to say, you may have to adjust your volume because every device is a little different. You may have to turn it up a little, you may have to turn it down a little. And after I get it started, I will mute everybody just so that we can get some good sound quality, so we don't get a lot of background noises. So here we go.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did.
Prison is a hard place to find yourself in. It's one thing if you did something wrong to get there. It's another thing altogether if you're there as a victim versus an actual criminal, particularly if your conviction was sponsored by the members of your own family. Well, this is precisely the place that a young man named Joseph found himself in. We're introduced to him at the age of 17. He is the son of Jacob, the grandson of Isaac, and the great-grandson of Abraham. He's a part of this great nation that God in the upper story is slowly building to reveal his presence, his power, and his plan to get all people back. But this family didn't function as one who was going to bring us back into a relationship with God. They could barely get along with each other. Studies show us that firearms in the home are almost always either intentionally or accidentally used on family members versus perpetrators. The same is true for the weaponry of poor character. The handgun of lies and the shotgun of deception were used almost exclusively on every member of Joseph's family, particularly young Joseph. You see, of the 12 brothers, Joseph was Dad's favorite. He even sported a coat of many colors that his dad gave him and left his brothers feeling cold-hearted towards him. And to make matters worse, Joseph had several dreams that he believed came from God, where at the end of the dream, all of his brothers were bowing down to him. In his innocence, he shared those dreams with his brothers. His brothers, in turn, declared their little brother their worst nightmare. One day, Daddy Jacob sent Joseph out in the field to fetch his brothers, who were tending to the sheep. They roughed up Joseph and then threw him into a pit. And over lunch, they made the decision to sell their younger brother to a band of gypsies on their way to Egypt. Joseph must have been frightened out of his mind. Once in Egypt, he's sold as a slave to serve in the house of Potiphar, the captain of the guard for the mighty Pharaoh. Then there's this surprising sentence that just appears in the story. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Even though God allowed his brothers to abuse him, God is now prospering him. With God's help, Joseph quickly rises and is put in charge of Potiphar's entire house. But then another twist. Another bomb drops. We are told that Joseph was well built and handsome, and that Potiphar's wife made repeated advancements on Joseph, but he does the right thing and he refuses her. Well, one day she tells her husband that Joseph made an advance on her and she resisted. Joseph's put in prison. Up and down like a seesaw, but the next thing we know, he's back up again. While Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. God again allowed for an unjust attack on Joseph and allowed him to go to prison. Yet once in prison, Joseph immediately gains favor and is put in charge of the prison. And one of the things that God did for Joseph was to give him the ability to interpret dreams. The story tells us that he's in prison for about 2 years when he gets a call from Pharaoh, the main dude, to come and interpret this dream he keeps having. Well, Joseph interprets the dream. Basically, he tells Pharaoh there's going to be 7 years of a bumper crop, or lots of food, and then there will be 7 years of famine, no food at all. You know, it's really helpful to know this. Genesis 41:46 tells us that Pharaoh believes him and puts him second in command over all of Egypt to lead. He's now 30 years old. 7 years of harvest come, and Joseph stores up food to get them through the 7 years of famine. No other nation or people group knows what's coming. At the end of the first 7 years, the 7 years of famine begins, but under Joseph's leadership, they are prepared. Now, the famine is affecting everyone, everywhere, including his father and his brothers back in Canaan. Jacob, Joe's dad, sends his sons to Egypt to get some food so they don't die. When they arrive in Egypt, they bow down before the second in command of all of Egypt, their punk brother Joseph, even though they didn't recognize him. Joseph is now 39 years old. 22 years has passed since he was sold down the river, thrown under the bus by his brothers. 22 years passed before the dream he dreamed as a teenage boy came true. After several emotional encounters, Joseph finally reveals his identity to his brothers. Here's what Joseph had to say to them in the story. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." What Joseph's brothers did to him in the lower story was completely wrong and had lifelong consequences of pain and guilt and depression. As a matter of fact, they could never really ever forgive themselves. But God used their sin-filled jealousy to accomplish his overall purpose, his upper story plan, which requires Israel to survive the famine. You see, somewhere in this journey, Joseph captured this, and very few people ever do. This is what enabled Joseph to process all the junk of his brothers and forgive them. Joseph was able to forgive his brothers for what they did to him in the lower story because he captured God's upper story plan. And that's huge. Some of you might think, wouldn't it have been easier for God to use his influence to recommend Joseph for the job instead of making him go through 22 years of struggle? Well, those 22 years of up and down struggles molded Joseph into the kind of man who could do what he did with integrity. Those 22 years gave Joseph an opportunity to see God's hand in life's most hopeless circumstances and situations and to learn to trust in God completely. Joseph, out of his position of power, moves his entire family to Egypt and gives them the fertile land of Goshen. The story tells us that when his dad was getting close to Egypt, Joseph went out in his chariot to meet him. Here's what the story says. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Joseph went on to be 110 years old. Yes, he had 22 tough years, but he ended up with 71 really great ones. And how rich it must have been to know that he was used by God to save Israel and to move God's upper story plan further toward completion. You know, the story is likely being rewritten for your life. Romans 8:28 tells us, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This promise of God tells us that if we love God and align our lives to his upper story purposes, everything in our lives, the ups and the downs, the mountaintops and the valleys, the highs and the hurts, the raises and the rejections, the good and the bad, are all working together to accomplish good. So be patient. Trust God. Let him mold you during the difficult seasons to equip you for the assignment ahead. You may be in a prison cell right now, either real or figuratively speaking, but if you align your life to God, your story isn't finished yet.
Good story. Wonderful story. But I got a question for you. If you look on page 37 of your study guide, the question I have for you is in the conversation part of the book, about halfway down on page 37. The first question under the conversation is, as you read the story of Joseph, what part was the most difficult for you to embrace? At what part was it just kind of difficult for you to read through, or maybe you were gnashing your teeth and it just a lot of tension? And the second part of that question is, what part gave you the most encouragement? What part of Joseph's story kind of lifted you up and helped you to maybe even see life a little differently? So those two questions all rolled into one question. Take a few minutes, reflect on the story of Joseph, and I'd like you to just write a couple lines right there on page 37. You're given a couple lines, you can't write a whole book, but put some words down about what was difficult for you and what was encouraging to you in the story of Joseph. So I'll give you 3-4 minutes to go ahead and do that. If you have a question, then just go ahead and take yourself off of mute and speak up. So about 3 or 4 minutes. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I've clicked a couple of buttons and you'll see on your screen that I've asked you to unmute. And I'm very interested in these two questions kind of pushed together into one question. What two scenes, or as you read it, it reads, as you read the story of Joseph, what part was the most difficult for you to embrace? So go ahead and take yourself off of mute, and I'm curious as to that first part. What was the most difficult for you to embrace?
For me, I'm sorry.
You can go ahead, Rodney.
Well, for me, it was hard to embrace the fact of his brothers throwing him in the cistern, and how all of them. Well, I think Reuben was actually trying to talk him out of doing some things, but then they eventually, I couldn't understand how they could sell their brother too. And I imagine Benjamin might have been too young. He might not have been around, but his brother just really I mean, they would have killed him, if it hadn't been for Reuben probably, but and then for them to go and make the father think that he had been killed by, by wild animals and stuff. That was pretty devious. I mean, I could never see a reason, even if I didn't care a whole lot for my brother. I probably wouldn't want him dead or anything like that. But that was the part that was hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah. Yeah, that was tough. That was I agree. That was tough. It's like, man, I can understand a dysfunctional family, but man, treating and
Yeah.
treating
But
your
then to go do that to their father also, I mean, they
yeah.
didn't to me they didn't care a whole lot about him either, because like they said, he was his favorite, so they knew that was going to hurt him.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rodney. Somebody else, I think Kay, you were going to make a comment.
Yes, well, Rodney answered the first one like I would have. So the encouraging one to me, I'll just skip to that one, was the reconciliation that Joseph was willing to make the first step and forgive his brothers of the betrayal that they had done. And he did it with love and held nothing back. He gave him hugs and he cried and wept. And I thought that if he can do that for what they've done, then the petty stuff that in our family, we should be able to forgive each other easily.
Also, amazing how he recognized his brothers and they didn't recognize him.
Mm-hmm.
Or he was on their mind all those years, or maybe not. But the fact that he recognized who his brothers were just from just seeing them, and they didn't recognize him. Just passion on his part, because he was the ruler and he had to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down on their life.
Right.
he ran them through some changes though before he just he made them jump through a couple of hoops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That he did.
Yes, I like that part.
Yeah, he may not have been totally delivered from his devious ways.
The part of the story that gave me the most encouragement was that when I listened to the story and I read it again, was that there were several times throughout the story when he mentioned that it was God's plan.
Mhm.
So that consistency of recognizing that it was God's plan, that was the workings of God's plan, and the result would be the workings of God's plan, was the encouragement for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I could see how that is encouraging, seeing someone who is getting it. A good example of someone who's actually seeing the lower story in perspective of the upper story and seeing it the way God sees it, not necessarily how we just look at it here on the lower story. Yeah.
Yeah, because he was questioned as, how can you be so forgiving? It's not just a matter of my emotions. It's because God wanted salvation for this family, for this line to continue. So that was the bigger picture.
Right. Right. He saw the bigger picture. He saw it from a bigger perspective, the upper story, and how Joseph was really saving lives. He basically saved, of course, being used by God, but he basically saved God's people.
Mm-hmm.
They were about to get wiped out because of a famine. Okay. What else did you all find either difficult or encouraging?
he was confronted with a lot of temptations also. The wife of, the woman throwing herself at him, and then he also had an opportunity to being second in command. He could have been a thief or anything. And wouldn't nobody have known, he could have cheated people and everything. And also, like Kay was saying about, he could have been even worse to his brothers. So he was faced with quite a few temptations, and he passed the test, seemed like.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that can be encouraging. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, he didn't, he did do something that, when you put those silver cups in their bags, that was kind of hard for me to take, because he was playing with these people and they were trying to save their lives and such. That was kind of hard for me to take.
Yeah.
But I knew that this was another plan in God's plan, but it also showed that he had a little deviousness in his own heart to put those cups in there and scare them to death when his soldiers people came running up behind him. And it was encouraging when he asked to send for the Father. And
right.
I really liked that part. It was encouraging to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question though.
Certainly.
It's about Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When they were being blessed, I got confused in there somehow about who was first and who was second when they were born. But when they were being blessed, why did he try to stop his dad from blessing the one over the other? And why did his dad choose to bless the other over?
Yeah, that can be that was a little odd. That little scene there, stuck in there, seems like it's a little odd. Yeah, with Ephraim and Manasseh, one was born before the other, and off the top of my head, I cannot remember one. I get too confused. I think Ephraim was the older. I think don't take my word for it, but one was older than the other. And tradition, the Semitic tradition, those people's tradition, even before Abram was called, was that the older gets a double portion and is blessed more than the younger. A lot of weight is put on the first son. When couples get together, they pray and pray, Lord, let the first, born be a son, so that it won't muddy the waters as far as inheritance.
That's right.
And it was basically patriarchal. And so clearly, one was born before the other. There should have been a blessing there taking place according to that tradition. However, and here's the interesting thing is, you can kind of see God's hand maneuvering things in these blessings. It's not overt, it's not explicit, but implicitly you can see that God was leading the lesser to be blessed more than the older. And if you look throughout the Bible at these blessings and how God is moving his plan forward, a lot of times he doesn't take the older. He takes the younger. For example, Saul. Saul, I think, was the last one. The prophet started with the oldest and went all the way down and said, okay, you got any more? go find this little, Saul, find Saul, and let's see if he's the one. And he ended up being the one. So really, we're kind of seeing a pattern of God not necessarily doing things according to tradition of man. And especially when Jesus comes along, we see how the kingdom of God works. We see that the greater will be lesser and the lesser will be greater. Jesus said, you must come to me as a child. A child in that culture, children, you don't speak unless you're spoken to. You really don't have a lot of worth until you reach maybe 10 to 12 years old, and you can put in some real work. And the kingdom of God seems to be upside down. If you want to be great, you have to be a servant of all. And so I think we see that pattern of blessing the lesser over the elder. Does that kind of make sense, Denise?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's the innocent ones as well.
The innocent ones?
Yeah, sometimes it happens that way, you know, instead of big.
The innocent ones.
Hey, Paul,
Yes.
going back to Joseph's encounters with his brothers on page 35. In the middle of that page, it says, on the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you were honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back to your starving household. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die. This they proceeded to do. Then said to one another, surely we are punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That is why this distress has come on us. So they realized that, you know, it went around full circle for them. They did something 20 some odd years ago to their brother. Now it's coming back to remembrance to them, even though they didn't know of Joseph, that was Joseph. But they realized that, hey, we've sinned, and so that sin right on us. Now we got to pay the price.
Yeah. Yeah, and they even recognized that, didn't they?
Yeah.
Right. It kind of come back on them.
I was a bit puzzled about the cup of divination. And supposedly this was Joseph. I didn't know whether was this a part of the trick that Joseph was playing on his brothers, or had he acclimated to some of the Egyptian religious practices?
Yeah. Yeah, as I was reading through there, I remember putting a couple question marks next to divination. Yeah. And I was thinking, wow, was he, still doing, was he doing divination? Yeah, according to the Egyptian traditions and religious cults and things like that. Or was it a translation? Maybe there's a better word, English word than divination. And maybe there was some type of, I know divination in English for us seems to indicate kind of a magical arts.
Black magic.
Yeah, black magic and things like that. I'm thinking maybe the original Hebrew, maybe there was a better word for in English that didn't mean necessarily magic and cultish type practices, but the fact that he was, because I know divination also can have the sense that you are trying to get in touch with a higher being, and that could have been God. It could have reflected some type of prayer ritual rather than magical arts. And I'm saying that only as a possibility. I haven't researched that.
Right.
And so, and the Bible doesn't really tell us. It just kind of puts it out there. And so we really don't know. What we do know is whether he was involved in that practice or not, he was still favored by God. And so if for some reason, let's say worst case, he was practicing some divination, God by his grace was still blessing him, and he was still finding favor in God's eyes. On the other side, if there's a better word than divination that should have been used in the translation, maybe it just means he was praying to God, invoking God's presence. So, but that, to answer your question, we're really not quite sure. But yeah, I had some question marks on that myself.
Yeah, it seems to contradict the fact that he feared and revered God in all of his daily actions with others.
Yeah. And one thing we're starting to find out also is, and we're starting to see this pattern if we really look at some of these people, is that we don't have to be perfect to be used by God. I'll never forget.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, none of us would, God's plan did in the water. Yeah. But I'll never forget the scene in my head of Noah walking off the ark, praising God, God having a covenant with him, and then he goes out and gets drunk. I mean, we're not talking about a buzz, okay? We're not talking about, those of you all who used to drink or know what I'm talking about, a buzz versus falling down drunk. He was falling down drunk to the point where his children got a good look at him, and the one that did right had to cover him up. And I know we haven't all been saved. Before I was saved, I was on my way to being a good alcoholic. I used to drink quite frequently. I knew the difference between a buzz and a falling down drunk. And let me tell you, that's falling down drunk when you're exposed like that, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So, we're seeing people, broken vessels, being used by God. And to me, that's encouraging. That really is.
But just think about it, just being confined for so long on the ship with all those things.
Oh, that sounds like justification. But God, you know what I've been through. I need a drink. God, I need a drink.
The first thing Noah said, I need a drink after all this.
Yeah. It's like, God, I've had a rough week. No, I've had a rough Lord, I'm a Cowboys fan. I need a drink.
Hey,
I know that, I know this one thing, and then I'm gonna shut up. That before Jacob died, he kind of got a little revenge on his sons, and kind of got back in where it said, and I didn't understand that, where it said he adopted Joseph's boys so that he could get double inheritance. And then I think it said Reuben didn't get this or that, and some of the sons were successful. So he had an opportunity to kind of get back at him a little bit before he died.
Yeah. I don't know how malicious it quite was. Definitely Joseph got some of his deviousness from his father. We see some tendencies. And if we study the blessings, we know that, and like I said before, implicitly, you can see the hand of God in these blessings and what happens later. And Reuben being, I think he was the eldest, if I remember right, at least one of the oldest. And yeah, there's kind of a leveling of the playing field in that blessing. So yeah, there's a little reaping and sowing going on there.
But you know what I was looking at when they were talking about Joseph in the beginning with, Joseph had his little attitudes, he aggravated his brothers, walking around, talking about he was going to be ruler over them and strutting in his little color coat that they didn't have. And I guess that's what kind of got them all upset. So he had a little personality too.
Yeah.
Maybe that personality was God used it. It was all part of his plan.
Yeah. It's interesting that Randy Frazee in the video makes the comment that Joseph made some mistakes, or at least telling of the dreams, specifically telling of the dreams, telling his dreams to his brothers, was done in innocence. When I went back and read through that,
Mhm.
I could see how maybe Joseph was just immature. Hey, I'm just going to tell him the dreams and let it fall where it may. Hey, that's on them. You know, maybe his emotional IQ wasn't that high. On the other side, I could see how it could be read in that it was arrogance, and I'm not quite sure it's that clear in the scripture whether he was arrogant or just innocent and naive.
I think it was a combination. I think it was a combination.
They used the word arrogant.
I think it was a combination.
Yeah.
He was immature. He was young, immature, and yeah, I think it was a combination.
If you are younger,
Too, being the youngest of all the brothers at that time, he was the youngest child, and usually, y'all know, the youngest one is the one that is the spoiled one.
That's
No, it's
right.
not. No, it's not. No, it's not.
oh,
Okay.
I was going to,
Mary, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, I
Wholeheartedly.
may I make a point? May I
Go
make a
ahead,
point?
Denise. Go ahead.
In that type of society
Mhm.
where it's definitely things coming down from the oldest to the youngest, a lot of other things fall down on the youngest. So it's very difficult, especially if you're a younger male. It's very hard for you to show your worth, especially when you're being compared to older brothers who are already making their way in life.
Yeah.
So you want to show them that you know something that they don't know, but it wouldn't necessarily be arrogance. Perhaps he's had this dream for a couple of times. And he said, you know, I've had this dream over and over. This is what I dream. And in my dream, I see you guys bowing down to me. You're bowing down to my corn. And it pisses them off because they're going out to work and he's still at home.
Yeah.
And but it's not his fault that he's still at home, it's the system.
Mhm. It's interesting that the Bible really doesn't give us a clear direction on that either way. And it's interesting to look at, and I've taught this the story a couple times, actually more than that, in some other venues and other smaller groups. And it's interesting to watch people's reactions and how I maybe, and just consider this as a possibility, that sometimes we read in our own presuppositions and family situations and personal situations into some of these situations that are not quite clear to get our conclusions. So I think it's interesting to see some of our reactions. Great discussion, wonderful discussion. I like seeing this kind of discussion because it tells me that you're engaging in the scripture or engaging in the story, and that you're thinking about some things and have some questions. And so we have some good discussions. So I really appreciate it. Let me encourage you to continue to read, continue to have a personal, not a personal, a reading buddy, someone you can discuss this with, and encourage you to keep on going. Let me talk about our personal time for this week coming up as we go forward. You can look at page 39 in your study guide and see where you're going to start your personal time. Your personal time this week in the study guide is going to be pages 39 to 43. I'm going to talk about deliverance. Things are going pretty well right now. We're on the mountaintop. I don't think it's going to stay there though. Not based on what we know is coming up. And that's the way narratives and that's the way life is. We're on the mountaintop right now. And this coming week, we're probably going to be down in the valley. So go ahead and read pages 39 to 43. Make sure to keep up with your movement number one and saying it several times, and the 5 movements, and do a little bit each day and keep that in front of you. Any last minute, and I apologize, we had such a good discussion. We're about 5 minutes over, and I apologize for that. If for some reason you need to leave, of course, go ahead. But I'm going to ask, are there any last minute questions or comments that you may have?
I have one comment,
Certainly.
and that's favoritism. And when you think about that family, he was favored. And if you think about our families today, if you ask parents, do you have a favorite? Most people will say no, but you find out that that's actually not the truth. And I know when I was growing up, I know my mother loved me dearly, but she favored my brother. And everybody in my family knows that. We just accepted it because that's the way life was. But I tried real hard with my kids not to play favorite. But if you ask each one of them, they'll say the other one's favorite. So, I think by default, we may favor one over the other. And it may be different reasons. It could be because one is more needy than the other. Ever know. But favoritism existed then and it exists now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very hard, if not impossible, to not favor one child over the other for different reasons. And you could even split your favoritism. You like this one for this and another one for that. But yeah, it's a tricky thing. It's tough, and it plays out in different ways in the family dynamics. It could be good and minimized, and then of course we see some dysfunctionality in families because of that. So yeah, we see that. Well, thank you so much for being here. Our live students, bear with me for just a second as I say goodbye to our recording students. Thank you for pushing a few buttons and watching this session. As you go through the study guide, you also, whether you're watching this as a recording a few days or even a few years from now, feel free to call the church. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. And thank you again for being with us, and see you next time.